Good evening and welcome back. In this lecture we will now be making the repository, so we'll be picking up where we left off and we will take the data we now have and we will create our first repository. So to do this we need to navigate back to the bitbucket.org website where we've set up an account. So you should have the account ready and you will need to be on the dashboard. And from here we just need to navigate to the top. We will find the repositories tab, drop that down and click on Create Repository at the bottom. And then with this selected, we will give it a repository name, which will be space shooter template, so exactly the same as the project name. It doesn't need to be, but this is just a preference I've taken. And then we can leave the repository access as private. The repository type is Git, and we can leave the advanced settings as they are. Any of these that you decide you may want to change can be updated later. Just to recap, we're using the Git word again, so this is still a Git type of repository, but it's being provided through Bitbucket and we're using SourceTree as the client. And then with that done, we will click the Create Repository button, and now we have our online repository set up and ready to use. Now just a few things which we won't be using, but which are worth knowing for when you come back and do this in the future. The preferable way and the normal way you would do this is you would create the repository at the beginning of the project. You would have that as an empty folder on the system, and then you would start putting the content of the project in that folder, and that will be updated at every stage then, and you would have the possibility to back that up right from the beginning. However, because I'm aiming this as a beginner's course, I think that the concepts of repositories and the process of doing it can be a bit daunting if it's the first time you've ever seen it, and I wanted to allow people to get more acclimatized to the Unreal Engine before we started jumping in to the third-party systems. So I think we've now had time to get used to the Unreal Engine. We've got things settled there a little, and I think now's a good time to start backing up our work and making sure that we don't lose anything as we go further. So the normal way you would do this is you could press clone, you would get a HTTPS link, and the SourceTree application will ask for this at a certain point I'll go through in a minute, and that would link the fresh repository to this one online. And when you do that, you would use this drop down here, the I'm starting from scratch, and you have your command prompts, and these command prompts are specific to when you first create a repository from scratch, as it says. The one that we're interested in though is we will be using the I already have an existing project, and we will use these command prompts, and we'll see now what they're for. So if you don't already have it open, we need to go back to the SourceTree application, so open that. And with the SourceTree application open, we'll have this here, and what we want to do is we need to represent the repository inside of the application as well. And to do this, all we need to do is simply go to the clone new, and we have a few options here. So this links up here, we can see the clone repository will link to the clone option we have over here, and it's asking for that HTTPS link, and then that would just link it, and it would then import everything which is on that server, and it would make a local copy on the system for you to use. Ultimately, what we can do is the reverse of that. We have an add working copy option which will take the local version of the project, and that will upload to the server, so that will connect to an online repository. And the one we're interested in is the Create New Repository tab here. So with this selected, again we want to make sure the repository type is a Git type. The destination path will be the project's UE4 space shooter template, so our root directory in the project folder. And it'll say roots down here if you've done that correctly. And again, remember this is important because we've put our git ignore in the root folder as well, and they need to be in the same level. And then lastly, we get the option to rename our project. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to leave the name the same for the project folder, the name that we'll see over here, and the name that we have in our repository online here, so they all link up. And then we just simply hit create. So this is the first step done. So now what we need to do, we want to link this repository to the repository online. At the moment this is just a local version which just happens to have the same name. They actually have no knowledge of each other yet. So to pass this knowledge across, we're going to go back to the internet for a moment, and this command prompt that we've opened up down here, we want the first line of this. We want the git remote add, And we can see the important thing is it's giving a reference to the URL, specifically to the space shooter template.git. So if we Control C that entire line, and then we're going to go back into the source tree application, and over here we're going to open up the terminal. And we're going to do it this way just because that then links the project folder to the directory that this will start us in, so we don't need to navigate there manually. And then all that we need to do is press Shift and Insert, and that will paste in the content that we've just copied. Alternatively, you can just press right click and paste, and then hit Enter. So we now have a reference to where the repository is stored. So that's the first step. And then the next thing we want to do is just open the terminal back up if you closed that previously. We will come over here, and we now want the second line of this, and we can just type this in by hand. It's quite a short line. So we have git push u origin all. So we essentially want everything in front of the pound sign, including all of the symbols. And what this is doing is this will make a push to the origin of our current repository, and that will take everything from our local folder. So if we hit Enter, it'll ask for our password, and this is the password that we've used on the Bitbucket website, and that's fine. We're expecting it to say that. And then the final thing that we want is to say git push origin tags. So we're just typing in the third line now. We'll hit Enter again. It will ask for our password. Hit OK. And there we go. So it's saying we don't have anything and there's no master at the moment, which is fine. So we're going to fix that now, in fact. So if we just drag this back over, what we want to do is we're going to make a comment in this box down here, so we can leave comments to what this commit will consist of. And this is just our initial commit. So that's all we'll type in there. And then before we can do this, we need to press the fetch button at the top here. And this is fetching from all remotes on the repository. So now we have the reference to the storage location. So we now have this origin remote. And what that means is if we go down here, we have our comment ready to be processed. And I've used the comment init, which I just do as my first initial commit for any Git project, just because I know it means that it's my initial commit. So you can make this absolutely anything though. And the last thing we want to do is we now have all of our files which are ready to be pushed to the repository. And to do that, we take them from the unstaged section. We will say stage all. Just OK, that is just saying that there's quite a lot of data there. And this will stage all of our files and put them up the top. And as soon as it's done that, we will be able to commit this first step in the repository. And you don't have to stage all. You can select certain files if there's some files you didn't want to go through, and you can do the stage selected instead. But at this point we want to stage everything, and then we're going to commit. That will create the master branch. Remember, it said that we were missing that in the terminal, so we now have our master branch. And what we want to do is we will use the push command here. So essentially what we're trying to do was push this in the command prompt, and we didn't have a master to push it to. We've just made that, and we're just going to do exactly the same thing, and rather than doing it in the command prompt, we're just going to do it by these handy buttons here. So we'll press push. We need to select the master as the branch to be pushing this to, and hit push again. And now this will take a fair amount of time because it's taking our entire project, or at least all of the files that we haven't put in the gitignore file, and it is pushing it to the online repository. So this will certainly take quite a while. So what I'll do is I'll just quickly describe what the branches are. The branches are different locations that we can aim the repository data to be stored. So for instance, most of the pushes will be made to the master branch because that will be where the majority of the project needs to be kept, or just happens to be kept. Now if you're going to do something which is incredibly risky, or just like a very strong prototype in the game, something you may not keep and something that may be a big risk of corrupting the rest of the project, what you'd likely do is to create a new branch, and you'll make sure that all further commits go onto that branch until you've got to the point where you've confirmed that A, it's gone past the point of being a prototype and it's staying in the project, and B, that it's stable and isn't going to break the rest of the project if you bring it back in. And then you can link that back up to the master branch. And what that does mean is then if it goes the other way, if you decide that it isn't going to work and it is just a prototype, then you can just revert back to the master branch section before you start doing this, and it won't ruin anything you had beforehand, and you can just pick up where you left off with the main chunk of the project and carry on. So that's the idea behind this. So I just want to show you the output we get after this is finished pushing. So I'll do what I've done in the past. I will let this push until it's finished, and I will resume the video when that's happened. Okay, so we are back, and we should now have something that looks like this. So if you don't have this, then just double click on the master branch and that will take you over here. And this just simply tells us that we now have a single commit which has been pushed to the master branch, and it gives us the date that that's happened, who's done it, and a commit reference. And then if we go back to the file status, we now have no files here because nothing's changed in the project, an empty comment box, and nothing we can really do here. So this is now up to date and everything's secured. If we press push again, it'll just tell us there's nothing to push, or it'll just drop straight out of there. So we can confirm that is now backed up and secure. The other way we can check this, if we go back to the Bitbucket website and go to our commits, we now have Rob has committed the same reference, so we can double check that in the application if you wanted, with the message in it, so initial commit, and that happened 5 minutes ago. So that has all now gone through, which means that everything has been pushed to the internet. If anything were to go wrong now, I would have at least this point to get back to in the project, so I wouldn't have to start from scratch. And that is how we can start using and implementing the source control in the project. So I'm going to leave this here for the setup of the repository. So we've now seen how to push a commit, and the other thing I wanted to do before the end of this section of the course is to show you how to pull a commit, so how to revert if something goes wrong. So that's what we'll do in the next lecture, and I will see you there.